The light rain falling that morning seemed unable to soften the rigid atmosphere of the house. The tall windows were always closed, and the heavy curtains left the mansion plunged in permanent shadows. Abby descended the marble steps with the light, silent footsteps of someone who already knew she wouldn't be noticed. Jonathan read the newspaper, as he did every day without looking at his daughter. Silence was the only common habit between them, and his cold eyes didn't even move when she wished him a good day. "Good morning, Father." He would simply turn the page and mumble something without taking his eyes off the article. "Remember to arrive on time today. I don't tolerate deviations." Abby felt like an unwanted guest in that house. There were no picture frames, no flowers, no visible memories of the woman who once filled that place with life. She hadn't known her mother enough to create solid memories, but her heart knew there were absences that words couldn't fill. In the car, looking through the window, her attention was drawn to a figure leaning against the wall of a forgotten house. It was a man huddled under a torn blanket, with bare feet and closed eyes, looking more like an abandoned object than someone with a history. "Why is he there alone?" she thought with a heavy heart. "He looks tired." At school, she didn't mention it to anyone. She kept the image in her mind like a precious secret. She spent hours wondering if he was hungry, cold, in pain. She couldn't explain why, but that figure seemed familiar, as if he had already been part of something she missed. In the afternoon, returning home, she ran to her room and began to draw. She sketched his closed eyes, the sheet on the ground, the wall behind. The stroke was soft, as if she feared hurting that fragile image. "I think he needs me," she whispered as she traced the contours of his face. "If I don't do anything, no one will." Dear viewer, before we continue, please comment where you're from and subscribe to our channel to always receive emotional stories. The next day, she hid a snack inside her backpack. She chose a sandwich and a small bottle of juice, the only things she managed to take without drawing attention. On the way to school, she made up an excuse that she wanted to walk alone to the gate, and with a wave to the driver, disappeared among the trees. Arriving at the same wall, she saw the man still there, but now with his eyes open, staring at the cloudy sky. She approached slowly without saying a word. When she extended the bag, he turned with a start, but upon seeing the girl, he frowned with astonishment. "It's for you, sir," she said shyly. "It's fresh, I promise." Elijah took time to react. He observed the girl with deep eyes, where surprise mixed with distrust. He sat up slowly as if his bones hurt with the simple movement. He took the lunch with trembling hands and thanked her in a low but firm voice. "This isn't common," he murmured, staring at Abby's curious face. "Nobody has looked at me like this for a long time." She smiled and sat down nearby, maintaining a respectful distance. "It's not fair for someone to be hungry while others throw food away," she replied. "My mother taught me that before she left." In the mansion, Jonathan noticed something strange that afternoon. His daughter arrived with a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen for many years. It wasn't the forced smile she displayed for visitors, nor the contained expression she exhibited at company parties. It was something else. He watched through the crack in the door as she went up to her room, humming. He sat down slowly at the table and left the cup of tea untouched. What could be making this girl act this way? He thought, restless. Sudden happiness doesn't come from nowhere. Not in our house. In the following days, Abby repeated the ritual. Each morning she hid something new in her backpack, and on the return from school she disappeared for 30 minutes before going home. With each meeting, Elijah became more talkative, more present. He told small stories, talked about books he read when he was young, about his childhood in a house similar to the one now falling apart. Abby listened attentively, like someone finding in a stranger the words she always wanted to hear. "My mother used to say that the world only seems big when you're alone," he said one day. "And now I don't feel so alone anymore." Jonathan observed his daughter's behavior with increasing suspicion each day. He searched her room for clues, but found only drawings, notebooks full of sketches of streets, lampposts, park benches, and the same man drawn from different angles. A chill ran down his spine. He grabbed one of the notebooks and flipped through it forcefully. The face of that man, always with the same calm expression, left him disconcerted. "Who is this guy? What does he want with my daughter?" he muttered, squeezing the notebook tightly. "She's getting too close to someone we don't know." Without saying anything to Abby, Jonathan called Matthew that night. They sat on the house porch as they did in their youth, but now the weight of silence between them was harder. "She's different, more alive, more restless," Jonathan said. "Do you think this could be dangerous?" Matthew took a sip of coffee and calmly replied, "It might just be a phase, but I can look into it if you want. Just don't treat her like a prisoner." Jonathan looked at his friend sternly. "She's all I have left. I can't afford to make mistakes with her." The next day, before Abby left for school, Jonathan discreetly installed a small tracker on the strap of her backpack. His daughter's exact movements would appear on his phone with real-time updates. He watched her get into the car and followed the routine normally, but his gaze was more attentive. He felt something was slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Abby walked down the sidewalk, anxious to see Elijah again. "I wonder if his cough from yesterday is better," she thought with a heavy heart. "I should have brought medicine too." Abby's routine gained a new rhythm. Every day after school, she would stop by the school library and pick up books she found interesting, choose a simple snack, and head to the abandoned house where Elijah waited for her, sitting on the same step, with the patient gaze of someone who didn't demand her presence, but was happy when it happened. The man didn't complain about the pain in his back or the cold in his feet. When he saw the girl approaching with her heavy backpack, he smiled as if life out there stopped for a few minutes. "Today I brought a book about adventures on the high seas," she would say enthusiastically. "And a piece of pie too, the way you like it." Elijah listened to each page turning as if it were a symphony. He commented on passages, told stories of his memories from when he still had an address and a surname. He talked about nights when he slept hidden in libraries, pretending he was just waiting for someone. Abby listened to everything with shining eyes, always drawing in her notebook each gesture, each expression. One of the drawings showed Elijah sitting under a starry sky, with his head tilted back and his eyes closed. Another showed him laughing at something she had said, with a handkerchief in his lap and a half-eaten piece of bread in his hand. "I like when you draw things as they should be," he said once, "even when reality insists on being ugly." Abby's drawings accumulated on loose pages that she hid among the clothes in her closet. One day when returning from school, Jonathan noticed that his daughter had forgotten her uniform on the chair. Searching through her backpack to see if there was homework, he found the notebook among the pencils. He sat on her bed and began to flip through it. With each page, his face hardened more. These weren't ordinary characters. That man was the same one appearing repeatedly, with a gaze too human to be invented. Jonathan pressed his lips and closed the notebook forcefully. "She's being manipulated by someone dirty," he said quietly. "I can't let this continue." That night, Abby was called to the main room. Jonathan was standing with the notebook open on the table. His face was cold, as if there was no patience left in stock. "Explain this," he said, pushing the notebook forward. Abby tried to stay calm, but her heart was racing. "They're drawings of characters, I imagined. I like to create stories, that's all." Jonathan didn't believe it. His eyes were fixed on the realistic strokes, the details of the disheveled hair, the well-defined wrinkles. "Don't lie to me. Who is this man?" Abby lowered her gaze and answered firmly, "It's just a character. He has no name." The next day, Jonathan went to Matthew's house. They sat on the porch, as usual, and he handed the notebook to his friend. Matthew observed the drawings carefully but without showing judgment. "She has talent, that's clear. But you're worried about who appears here, not about the art." Jonathan nodded in agreement. "I want to know if this man is dangerous, if he's done something wrong, if he has a criminal record." Matthew sighed and took the notebook. "I'll investigate, but sometimes the danger isn't in the people we draw, but in how we treat those who draw them." Meanwhile, Abby went to meet Elijah as she did every day. When she arrived, she found the man lying on the same step, but his face was pale and he was trembling. His cough was intense, dry, constant. Abby knelt beside him, took the juice bottle from her backpack and placed it against his lips. "You're sick. This isn't normal." Elijah tried to smile but coughed again. "It's just the weather, child. This cold is not for old men like me." Abby quickly got up and ran toward the house. She secretly grabbed a thermometer, some basic medicines, and a blanket from the guest room. "You're not going to die here alone, you hear me? I won't let you." Elijah tried to refuse, but he was too weak. Abby insisted and placed the thermometer under his arm, carefully offering him the pills. The fever is high. Tomorrow I'll bring something stronger. But you have to promise me you won't leave this place." Elijah gently held her hand. His eyes were watery, but not from pain. It was gratitude. "I never thought anyone would remember me like this. I don't know what you saw in this old man, but thank you." Abby adjusted the blanket over him and murmured, "I saw someone who also seems to have lost something." When Elijah fell asleep, Abby sat for a few minutes watching his face. He didn't look like a dangerous man, nor crazy, nor dirty. He looked like a tired man, full of stories to tell and no one to listen. She opened her notebook and drew the moment. Elijah sleeping with the blanket over his shoulders, his face softened by fever, his arm extended beside the juice bottle. On the wall behind him, she wrote with a colored pencil, "Invisible people feel too." Before leaving, she whispered a promise. "Tomorrow I'll bring hot soup and that book about travels. You need to see the Sahara Desert, even if only through reading." The next day, Jonathan went to Matthew's office again. He brought his phone with his daughter's recent locations. He showed the exact spots where she stopped every late afternoon. Matthew observed, already concerned. "She goes to the same place, always at the same time. That's fixation." Jonathan narrowed his eyes and responded coldly, "It's obsession. And nobody becomes obsessed with something like this unless they're being influenced." Matthew crossed his arms. "I'll go there tomorrow, but I hope we're not about to commit an injustice." Jonathan stood up and said without looking back, "If someone touched my daughter, he'll pay dearly for it." Society, while the two discussed hypotheses, Abby returned to the abandoned house with soup in a thermos, new books, and a piece of cake. Elijah was better, although he still coughed. She helped him sit up and began reading the first chapter of a book about exotic travels. He listened like a hypnotized child, his eyes fixed on the girl's voice. Elijah took a carefully folded paper from his pocket, yellowed by time, and handed it to Abby with trembling hands. "I've kept this for many years. It was the last thing I found from my mother. I found it inside a box, hidden in our old house. I never had the courage to show it to anyone. Until now." Abby slowly opened the note and read it silently. The handwriting was weak, as if it had been written with effort. The words spoke of longing, guilt, of a love that resisted time, but it was the last sentence that made her hold her breath. "If you ever find Trevor again, tell him I forgive him. Even though he didn't come back, he will always be my son." Abby raised her eyes, surprised. "Trevor, was that your brother's name?" Elijah nodded with watery eyes. She never said his name when she talked about him, only here in this letter. It was the first and only time I saw it written. The girl kept the note in her backpack, promising to return it, but deep down she knew that paper was more than a family secret. It was a clue, a connection to something lost, perhaps unrecoverable. Elijah leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. "If you can find anything about her, about where she was buried, about him, maybe I'll understand what I'm still doing here." Abby pressed the note against her chest and responded firmly, "I will find out. You deserve answers. You deserve peace." Elijah smiled with wet eyes. "You are stronger than you think, girl, and more necessary than you imagine." A day passed. The wind that morning was colder than usual. Abby left the mansion with hurried steps, her eyes fixed on the backpack she carried firmly on her back. She didn't want to draw attention, but she also couldn't pretend to be calm. Elijah had coughed all night the day before, and even with the medicines she had brought seemed weaker, slower, quieter. It was the first time she felt real fear of losing him. With books pressed against her chest, she looked around and entered the abandoned house again. "Please be better," she thought while climbing the creaking steps. "Don't scare me like this." Elijah was leaning against the wall, his eyes half closed and his breathing shorter. He had spots on his face that she didn't remember seeing before. When he saw her, he gave a tired smile, but said nothing. Abby approached carefully, pulled the blanket she had brought the day before and covered his legs. "You need to see a doctor," she said with a choked voice. "This has gone too far." Elijah held her wrist for a second and slowly shook his head. "I've already tried. They don't listen to people like me." Abby pressed her lips and replied firmly, "Then now they're going to listen through me." That afternoon, after school, Abby didn't go straight home. Instead, she went to the police station where she knew Matthew would still be on duty. She asked to speak with him privately, took the folded note from her backpack and handed it to him with trembling hands. He said it was his mother who wrote this. He's looking for his lost brother, but doesn't even know if he's alive. Matthew read each line carefully, then looked at Abby seriously. This name, I haven't seen it in a long time, but I'll look into it. There's something strange about this story. Abby swallowed hard and clutched her backpack tightly. Don't tell my father anything, please. He wouldn't understand. While Matthew began searching the old files for any trace of the woman mentioned in the note, Jonathan was getting up from his office chair with his phone in hand. Abby's location had been static for too long at the same point. The same point as in recent days. The same point he had already marked on the map. He ran his hand over his face, grabbed his coat and left quietly. He needed to know exactly what she was doing. And if it wasn't serious, at least he would be sure. She's hiding something, and I'm going to find out what it is. Abby returned late in the afternoon with hot soup and a new book. Elijah could barely keep his eyes open, but tried to smile when she put the food on the spoon and blew on it before bringing it to his mouth. The girl talked about the book, even without knowing if he was hearing properly. This one is about a boy who crossed the forest with just courage and a broken compass, she said with a forced smile. Sounds familiar, right? Elijah touched her arm lightly and tried to speak, but coughing interrupted him. Abby moved closer, worried. You're not well. I can't pretend this isn't getting worse. It was at that exact moment that Jonathan stopped outside the house. The gate was ajar and he crept to the side, where he could see inside through the cracked window. What he saw paralyzed him. His daughter, kneeling before a dirty man holding his hand, putting something in his mouth. Jonathan's eyes widened. When Elijah held Abby's arm to try to alert her to a strange noise inside the house, Jonathan didn't see that. He only saw the contact, the touch, the gesture misinterpreted. With a distraught face, he pulled out his cell phone and dialed Matthew's number, his voice choked with desperation. It's him. It's that man. He's with my daughter now. Come, now. Matthew hung up without responding. The tone of Jonathan's voice left no room for doubt. Arriving at the location minutes later, with his badge visible and a tense expression, he entered without knocking. Abby turned around, startled to see him, and immediately stood up. Elijah tried to get up too, but his legs wouldn't obey. Matthew looked at the scene, then at the fallen man, then at the girl. Someone explain to me what's happening here, he said firmly. Abby started to speak, but Jonathan arrived from behind, pushing the door forcefully. He was touching her, I saw it. Don't lie to me, Abigail. Abby held her father's arm, trying to prevent him from getting closer. He's sick, I was helping him. He never hurt me, never touched me inappropriately. Matthew gestured for silence. He approached Elijah and saw his eyes tearing up, his body limp, his breathing weak. I need to take him in just as a precaution. You understand that, Abby? She wanted to protest, but Matthew's look said there was no choice. Elijah nodded, even without strength. I understand. Don't worry, girl. Everything will be all right. Abby knelt beside him and whispered, I promise I'll prove you did nothing wrong. Matthew carefully led Elijah to the patrol car, asking Abby to follow them with her father. Jonathan, still agitated, didn't argue. He just opened the car door and waited for his daughter to get in. The way to the police station was silent, dense as if each kilometer dragged a part of the trust between them. When they parked, Jonathan kept his hands on the steering wheel for a few seconds before speaking without looking at her. You lied to me. For days, I can't trust you anymore. Abby turned her face slowly, her eyes burning. I lied because I knew you wouldn't listen, because all you see is what you want to see. Jonathan closed his eyes for a second, as if that hurt more than he wanted to admit. Maybe that's exactly it. At the station, Matthew filed the report with regret. He knew Elijah had done nothing wrong, but he needed to follow protocols. He put Elijah's mother's note in an envelope and locked it in the safe. Later, when night fell and the city grew quiet, Matthew was alone in the office, looking at the data he had gathered. The woman's name on the note appeared in old records as a person who had disappeared decades ago. She had lived in another state and had 2 children, but only one of them was officially registered. So it's true, he thought. He has a brother, and this story is bigger than we imagined. But now everything was stuck. Elijah was imprisoned and Abby isolated. In the police station room, Abby was sitting on a wooden chair, with trembling hands on her lap and eyes fixed on the door leading to the cell where Elijah had been taken. Matthew tried to calm her down, but she no longer heard any words. Everything inside her was urgency. When she finally could speak with him, she rose forcefully and approached Matthew with eyes full of fury and fear. "He never hurt me. You need to believe me. I was helping him. He was sick. He could barely breathe." Matthew placed his hand on her shoulder and responded cautiously, "I believe you, but that doesn't change the protocol I need to follow." Jonathan observed everything from a distance, leaning against the wall with crossed arms. His face was tense, but his gaze avoided his daughter's. Abby turned to him and tried again. "Dad, please listen. Elijah isn't dangerous. He just needs help. Why can't you see that?" Jonathan shook his head firmly and answered in a low, dry voice, "Because you're a child, and children don't understand the danger that exists in the world." Abby moved away from him, fists clenched with heavy breathing. "Maybe you're the danger here, because nobody listens when fear is greater than love." Hours later, Matthew sat in front of the cell where Elijah was lying on the concrete bench. His face was weary, his breathing still short. The officer opened the file with the mother's letter in hand and faced the man in front of him. "I need you to tell me everything, Elijah, in whatever way you can. Tell me who you are." Elijah took a deep breath and began to speak in a hoarse voice. "I left home when I was still young. My mother wouldn't accept my choices. We fought badly. I said things I shouldn't have. I left thinking that one day I would return, but time passed. When I tried to return, the house was empty. They said she had disappeared." Matthew lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of those words. "And you never heard from her again?" Elijah shook his head with difficulty. "Never. Until I found this letter. It was inside a forgotten box, in the house where I grew up. The handwriting was hers. She talked about forgiveness, about a brother. I didn't know I had one." Matthew noted everything calmly, but his expression showed discomfort. "This doesn't prove your innocence, but it also doesn't sustain the accusation. There's no injury, no witness, just a misguided interpretation." Elijah raised his eyes and asked with sincerity, "And what will happen to me now?" Matthew sighed and closed his notebook. "For now you need to wait, but I'll do my best to resolve this soon." Outside, Abby paced back and forth, ignoring her father who was trying to convince her to get in the car. When Matthew returned with tense shoulders and a tired expression, she ran to him. "So, will he stay in prison? Will he be charged? Please tell me." Matthew scratched the back of his neck and responded with a firm voice. "Due to lack of evidence, he will be released tomorrow, but he will receive a restraining order. He won't be able to return to the house where he was found." Abby felt the ground disappear for a moment, but that was his only home, where he sleeps, where he keeps his memories. Matthew nodded with regret. "And still, it's the law. I can't do more than that now." On the way back home, the silence was cutting. Jonathan drove without looking at his daughter, and Abby kept her eyes fixed on the road, as if she wanted to jump out of the car and return to the police station. When they arrived, she slammed the door hard and went up the stairs without saying anything. Jonathan followed her and found her in the bedroom, throwing books on the bed. "You need to stop this, Abigail. This has gone beyond a whim. You're putting your life at risk." Abby turned with inflamed eyes and a trembling voice. "It's not a whim. He's my friend. He listened to me when you wouldn't listen to anyone. You're trapped in a world where only fear exists." Jonathan hit his hand against the wall. "I don't want my daughter treating homeless people as friends." The phrase echoed through the room like a punch. Abby breathed deeply, closed her eyes for a moment, and then faced her father. "And I don't want a father who would rather lose his daughter than admit he's wrong. You're so afraid to feel again that you don't see anything anymore. Since Mum died, you stopped living, and now you're trying to do the same to me." Jonathan remained silent. The words hit him directly, as if they were exposing something he didn't know was still bare. He turned his back, with stiff shoulders, and left the room without saying a single word. Abby closed the door slowly, her heart racing, and went to her desk. She took her sketchbook, opened it to the last page, and began to scribble forcefully. The stroke was nervous, quick, as if she needed to get something out from inside. She drew her mother with open arms, embracing Elijah in a gentle hug. Her mother's hair fell over her shoulder, and her gaze was sweet. Next to them, she drew the figure of her father, but this time with his face erased as if he were disappearing. "He doesn't see. He doesn't hear. He doesn't feel," she whispered with a choked voice. "But I still remember Mother smiling." She closed the notebook gently, took a deep breath and went to the window. Night had already fallen, and the sky was clear, full of stars. The moonlight illuminated the silent garden. Abby rested her face against the glass and whispered to her reflection, "I won't let you be forgotten, Elijah. Not by the law, not by fear. I will discover everything." And in that moment, she felt that the search for truth wasn't just about justice, but about something even more important, about identity, about healing, about reunion. She knew she wasn't alone, even if everyone said otherwise, and that was enough to continue. Matthew's office was immersed in silence, broken only by the sound of keyboard clicks and old pages being leafed through. Before him were scattered civil records, missing person reports and forgotten files from previous decades. The name that appeared in Elijah's note, the mother's name, was known. What caught his attention was a footnote in an old document, indicating that she had 2 children, but only one of them officially registered. The other, described as without formal documentation, seemed to have disappeared in childhood. Matthew whispered to himself, frowning. If this brother exists, he might be living on the margins like Elijah, perhaps even more so. The clue that made the difference was at the end of the note, a nickname, almost childish, that Elijah's mother used when referring to her second son. Matthew typed the nickname into his system and cross-referenced it with police and shelter records from the city. He found occurrences linked to a similar name, always with signs of identity alteration and minor offenses. The pattern was clear: aggressive behavior, history of abandonment, attempts to hide true origin. Matthew wrote down the most recent registered address, not knowing exactly what he would find. If it's him, all of this could change. But if it's not, maybe this story will never close. While investigating, Matthew was also busy finding a reliable shelter for Elijah, now that he could no longer approach the abandoned house. He called an assistance center with limited vacancies and explained the situation. Elijah was welcomed with reservation, but quickly showed himself willing to help, even though still fragile. He spent his days distributing meals, listening to stories from other men like him, and helping with simple tasks. Even with his tired body, he felt useful for the first time in a long time. "Here no one looks at me as if I were dangerous," he told one of the attendants. "They look at me as if I were part of what still exists." In the mansion, Jonathan walked through the corridors like a ghost. His daughter's words still echoed in his mind, scratching from within. On impulse, he went up to the attic, where boxes of old objects remained untouched since his wife's death. He searched until he found an old cell phone, covered in dust. He turned on the device and began to listen to the stored audio files. They were simple voice recordings, but one of them made him stop. His wife was saying in a calm and loving tone, "Our role as parents is to teach love, not fear. If one day you forget this, listen to me again." Jonathan fell to his knees, his eyes full of tears. "I forgot, and now I am alone." While Jonathan faced his own reflection in the cracked attic mirror, Abby walked hidden through the city streets. She knew where the shelter was because she had overheard a comment from Matthew on the phone. She hid her backpack under her coat, passed through the gate, and entered the courtyard where some people were talking. She looked around until she saw Elijah sitting on a bench with a blanket over his legs and a bowl of soup in his hands. She ran to him and knelt down, holding his hand tightly. "I knew you hadn't done anything. I knew you were still here." Elijah smiled, moved. "You came back. I knew you would. Thank you for believing." The two talked for long minutes, and Abby told him about what she had heard about the letter, about the possibility of a lost brother, about Matthew investigating everything. Elijah remained silent, just listening, with tearful eyes. "I always thought it was too late to understand who I am, but maybe I still have time." Abby squeezed his hand and answered without hesitation. "There's always time when someone believes." Elijah nodded slowly. "If my mother left me this letter, it's because she didn't give up on me, and now I can't give up either." At the police station, Matthew printed the documents that cross-referenced his missing brother's data. There were too many coincidences to ignore. The man he was looking for had no official records, but appeared to be involved in several cases of assault and false identity. The dates matched, the locations matched, and the pattern of disappearance was consistent. There was a real chance that he was alive, but hidden under another identity. Matthew turned on the recorder and left a voice note for himself. Following solid lead. Elijah's brother may be circulating in the downtown neighborhoods. Need to confirm personally. Meanwhile, Abby was returning home before dark, but with her mind racing. She didn't want to lie to her father anymore, but she couldn't stop now either. This story was bigger than her, bigger than Elijah. Jonathan was waiting for her in the living room with the old cell phone in his hands. When she entered, he didn't yell. He just looked up and spoke in a calm, almost strange voice. "Today I heard your mother. After so long, I heard her." Abby stopped at the door, surprised. "And what did she say?" Jonathan looked at the floor, took a deep breath and answered. "She said our role is to teach love, and I only taught fear." The silence between father and daughter was no longer cold. It was heavy, dense. Jonathan stood up and approached his daughter but didn't try to hug her. He just looked into her eyes and spoke sincerely. "I don't know how to change all this, but I want to try. Tell me what to do." Abby felt her heart tighten. She wanted to believe. She wanted this openness to be genuine, but it still hurt. "You can start by listening to me, without interrupting, without judging, just listen." Jonathan nodded, swallowing hard. "Then talk, daughter. I'm here. For the first time, I'm here." Night fell over the city, but something inside the mansion seemed to have lit up. For the first time in a long time, Jonathan looked at his daughter as someone who needed to be understood, not controlled. And Abby, still hurt, saw in her father a possibility of reconciliation. On the other side of the city, Elijah lay on a simple bed in the shelter, holding his mother's note like a compass. Matthew watched through the window of the police station office, knowing there was still much to come. But now, with all the pieces beginning to fit together, a truth was starting to emerge, and no one was alone anymore. That morning, Jonathan insisted on taking Abby to school. The gesture, though simple, hadn't happened in years. In the car, the silence between them was different from before. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was suspended, as if something was about to be said but didn't know where to begin. Abby looked out the window, fidgeting with her fingers anxiously, while Jonathan drove with doubled attention, observing his daughter's expressions as if trying to decipher an ancient enigma. Upon arrival, she thanked him without enthusiasm, but also without coldness. "Thank you for bringing me," she said calmly. Jonathan merely nodded, but his eyes said more. "I should have done this all along." Before leaving, Jonathan decided to walk around the school corridors. It was rare for him to allow himself this kind of thing, but something inside made him walk aimlessly until he found the art wall. He stopped when he saw the drawings signed by his daughter. The works were framed in colored paper, with phrases written by children about what empathy, transformation, and courage meant. Jonathan approached slowly and recognized Abby's strokes immediately. One drawing showed Elijah with a gentle smile, another, a dark shadow with outstretched hands, and the last one, 3 people sitting on a bench, Abby in the center, Elijah on the left, and on the right, a faded figure, faceless, nameless. She drew me, absent. On the way back home, Jonathan didn't turn on the radio, didn't answer calls. He only thought about the firm and sincere strokes of that image. Upon arriving, he went straight to his daughter's room and waited until she returned. When Abby entered and saw her father there, she paused for a moment. Jonathan stood up, holding a copy of the drawing he had requested from the teacher. "Why did you draw me like this?" Abby crossed her arms and answered without hesitation. "Because that's how you show yourself, always near but never present." Jonathan tried to approach, but Abby took a step back. "You say you want to change, but you still don't listen. Listening isn't just waiting for your turn to speak." Meanwhile, at the shelter, Elijah was sitting under the shade of a tree, helping to fold blankets with slow but precise gestures. He wasn't coughing as much anymore, and color had returned to his lips. An older man approached and commented, pointing to Elijah's face. "I know someone with your face. I don't know if he's related, but he looks too much like you." Elijah looked up, surprised. "Where did you see this man?" The other replied in a low voice. In the alleys of the east side. He lives in hiding, always afraid. But that face, it's like seeing you in a broken mirror. Elijah remained silent, his heart racing. Could it be him? Matthew received the information through a contact at the shelter and wasted no time. He took the description, cross-referenced it with data he already had from the previous investigation, and realized the points matched. He got into the patrol car and went straight to the east side, where he parked discreetly and began walking through the narrow streets, observing faces, steps, glances. After minutes of searching, he saw a man standing in an alley, leaning against the wall, going through a bag of tattered clothes. The face, despite the marks of time and dirt, was too similar to be a coincidence. Matthew approached slowly, but when the man saw him, he ran. The chase didn't last long, as Matthew didn't intend to catch him by force. He just needed confirmation. He returned to the car, took a photo of Elijah, and quickly created a side-by-side comparison with the image he had just captured of the man in the alley. Then he called Abby. "I need you to come here. I want you to see something. It might be important for Elijah." Abby hesitated for a few seconds but agreed. She arrived with quick steps, her face tense, and Matthew showed her the two images. Abby remained silent for a moment, observing every detail, the features, the structure of the face, the eyes. "It's him, I'm certain. He looks like Elijah, but with anger in his eyes." Matthew knew he couldn't act without evidence. Abby's presence confirmed the resemblance, but it was still necessary to cross-reference data with more documents. "Do you think Elijah would recognize this face?" Abby nodded with conviction. He wouldn't forget his brother, even after so many years. Matthew put the phone in his pocket and looked at the horizon. "If this man is indeed the missing brother, we need to find him before he disappears again, and we need to protect him from himself." Abby took a deep breath and murmured, "And perhaps protect him from the pain that has been forgotten for so long." At the shelter, Elijah listened attentively to Matthew's description. When he saw the image, he froze. His hands trembled, his eyes filled with tears, and silence took over the room. He touched the face in the photo with his fingers, as if wanting to confirm it was real. "This is my brother," he said with a choked voice. "Even dirty, even tired. It's him. I would remember that look anywhere." Matthew placed his hand on Elijah's shoulder and spoke firmly. "Then let's bring him back. But we need to do this the right way." As the plan began to take shape, Abby returned home with a restlessness she couldn't control. She went up to her room and took out her sketchbook. On the last page, she drew the man from the alley with heavy strokes, dark eyes, hard expression. Next to him, she drew Elijah with the same face, but illuminated. Above them, she wrote, "Two paths, one origin." She closed the notebook forcefully and looked at the bedroom door, as if expecting her father to enter. But the house was silent, and deep down she still didn't know if he was really ready to hear everything that was yet to come. "Will he understand what we're about to discover?" she thought with a heavy heart, "or will he hide again?" The sky was cloudy when Trevor showed up at the shelter, with firm steps and a gaze loaded with contained anger. He wore a dirty jacket, disheveled hair, and restless eyes, as if he might explode at any moment. Elijah, who was organizing blankets in the courtyard, stopped when he saw him. The shock was immediate. His face seemed hardened, but he strangely felt that he knew the man. Trevor walked up to him without averting his gaze, stopping a few steps away. "So you're my disgusting brother. I want my share of the house. That house is as much mine as it is yours." Elijah raised his hands in a calming gesture. "Trevor, wait. We can talk. There's still time to work this out." Trevor didn't want to listen. His voice cut through the air like a dagger soaked in resentment. "You had her forgiveness, but me, I was left behind. While you ran away, I was stuck in that house with silence and guilt." Elijah approached, still trying to maintain control of the situation. "I didn't run away from you. I ran away from the pain. I ran because I didn't know how to stay." Trevor took a step back, his fists clenched. "And now you show up here with that saintly face as if nothing happened. Well, I won't accept it. Either you give me what's mine or I'll take it by force." Matthew, who had been warned about Trevor's presence at the shelter, arrived minutes later. He observed the tension from a distance before intervening. When he approached, Trevor was already agitated, yelling about rights and inheritance. Elijah was trying to contain him, but it was clear that words would no longer have any effect. Matthew interrupted firmly. If there's an inheritance, there's a document, and that's what we're going to verify. Trevor looked at him with contempt. I don't need paper to prove I'm a brother. The house is mine by blood. Matthew stared without blinking. But justice doesn't work based on blood. It works based on evidence. The next day, Matthew accessed the records of the property left by Elijah's mother. After hours of searching, he found the official will document. The house had been left solely to Elijah, with no mention of another heir. Everything was sealed, registered, and signed according to law. Matthew printed the copies and took them to Elijah. Here it is. Legally, there's no dispute. This house is yours. Elijah held the paper with trembling hands. Even after everything, she still thought of me. Matthew nodded respectfully. She knew you would return, and she knew who needed this fresh start. In an attempt to reverse the situation, Trevor showed up the next day with a crumpled paper full of erasures. He claimed it was a forgotten version of the will, which included his name as a co-heir. Matthew analyzed the paper and immediately noticed the inconsistencies. The mother's signature was a crude imitation. The dates didn't match the original records. He called Trevor for a conversation, keeping a neutral tone. You forged this document. This is fraud, and you can be arrested for it. Trevor, breathless, tried to insist. I just want what's mine. I deserve it as much as he does. Matthew responded without hesitation. What you deserve, justice will decide, but now you'll have to answer for what you did. That same day, Trevor was detained for attempted fraud. Elijah watched everything from a distance, his heart divided between relief and sadness. He didn't want to see his brother punished, but he could no longer carry the guilt for something he didn't do. Abby, who was following everything carefully, held her father's hand as she watched Trevor being taken away. Jonathan, in silence, observed with a mixture of astonishment and respect. For the first time, he saw in Elijah not just a homeless man, but someone who bore pain with dignity. He just wanted a place to call home, and he almost lost it all because of the past. After Trevor's arrest, Jonathan approached Elijah in the shelter's courtyard. The two remained silent for a few moments, until Jonathan extended his hand. If you need help regularizing anything about the house, I can take care of it. I have friends at the registry office. I can facilitate the procedures. Elijah looked at him, surprised by the gesture. Why? You don't know me, and you don't owe me anything. Jonathan took a deep breath before answering. You took care of my daughter better than I did. Maybe I'm just trying to start over. Elijah shook his hand firmly. Then we're even. That scene touched Abby deeply. She watched her father's gesture with teary eyes, and for the first time in a long time, felt that he was really trying to change. She walked slowly to him and hugged him tightly, without saying anything. Jonathan was paralyzed for a moment, then returned the hug with trembling arms. Sorry it took me so long to understand, he murmured near his daughter's ear. Abby closed her eyes and responded sweetly. We're still at the beginning, but now we're going in the same direction. The afternoon fell over the shelter with an air of renewal. The grey clouds had dissipated, and the timid sun emerged from between the tree branches. Elijah sat on the same bench where he used to think in silence. Now, by his side, were Abby and Jonathan. None of the three said anything, but it wasn't necessary either. The presence was enough. The absence had been filled, the house was secure, and the future seemed for the first time less frightening. Abby looked at her father and said in a low voice, I think now the drawing can be complete. Jonathan smiled slightly. And may we never need to erase anyone from it again. One day passed. The sun crossed the clouds gently that morning, as if the sky also knew that something important was about to happen. The tables were covered with light cloths, simple flowers decorated the corners, and the faces around showed fatigue and hope mixed together. The new shelter, built on the land next to the old abandoned house, was finally ready. Elijah wore a clean shirt, buttoned with some effort, and observed every detail of the space with watery eyes. I never thought I'd see something like this with my name at the entrance. It's as if they've given me back the life I lost. Abby walked among those present with serene steps, holding a small envelope and a notebook. She knew she would speak to the school that day, and her heart was beating strongly in her chest. As she approached the improvised stage, silence took over the yard. Students, teachers, and residents waited in respectful silence. She opened her notebook and read with a firm voice. Today I don't speak just as a student. I speak as someone who learned what it means to lose and start over. I want to share a piece of a letter. A mother wrote this shortly before departing. If you ever meet Trevor again, tell him I forgive him. Even though he never came back, he will always be my son. This is forgiveness. This is family. Jonathan was behind the audience near a tree with his arms crossed and a tense face. He didn't expect to be moved, but every word from Abby pierced through his defenses. It wasn't just about Elijah and his brother. It was about him, too. About everything he had failed to be and say. When Abby finished, a brief applause spread, but she didn't smile. She carefully put away her notebook and descended from the stage in silence. Jonathan walked slowly toward her and extended an envelope. I wrote this last night. You can read it whenever you want. Abby took the envelope and placed it in her backpack without opening it. Thank you, Dad. Just writing it means a lot. As the guests dispersed, Elijah was helping to organize the chairs despite everyone's insistence that he should rest. He couldn't stay still. The new shelter was more than just walls. It was a symbol of everything he had regained. When Abby appeared beside him, he stopped and smiled. Remember when I first met you? You seemed scared of the town, but with courage in your eyes. Now look, you're helping build a better world. Abby shook her head and replied with a discreet smile. I think we're doing this together. And there's still much more to come. Dinner that night was simple but symbolic. A long table was placed in the newly painted dining hall. Elijah sat at the head, still surprised by the invitation. Abby sat to his left, organizing the cutlery. Jonathan arrived last, paused for a few seconds observing the two, and without ceremony, pulled out a chair and sat to Elijah's right. No one said anything for a few seconds. Then Abby served rice on the 3 plates and broke the silence naturally. At least today no one will eat alone. Elijah nodded with shining eyes. For the first time in a long time I feel at home. The conversations at the table started timidly, but gradually smiles emerged. Jonathan told about the day he tried to make pancakes and almost set the kitchen on fire. Abby laughed heartily, and Elijah added that once he tried to cook bread soup for lack of anything else. The stories were simple, but united the three with a silent force. Jonathan observed his daughter differently. Each of her gestures was a reminder of what he had lost, but also a bridge to what he could still build. You have a lot of your mother in you, he murmured suddenly. Abby raised her eyes and answered, she would be proud to see you here today. After dinner, Elijah remained at the table with his head down as if still absorbing everything. Abby took her sketchbook from her backpack, opened to a clean page and began to scribble with the pencil she always carried in her pocket. Jonathan stood up to see what she was doing, but stopped when he saw the lines forming. Abby was drawing the 3 of them sitting at the table, relaxed faces, plates still full, hands on the wood. It was a portrait of a moment that should never be forgotten. I want to keep this, forever, because it was real. Elijah rose slowly and looked at the drawing over her shoulder. He remained silent for a few seconds, then placed his hand on the girl's shoulder and spoke in a low, almost broken voice. You gave me more than food, Abby. You gave me a name, you gave me peace, and now you gave me family. Jonathan nodded with his eyes fixed on the illustration. And you gave me the chance to fix what I destroyed in silence. Abby smiled, without taking her eyes off the paper. Maybe that's what we do here. We gather the pieces and transform them into something still worth it. The shelter, which had once been just an idea on an empty plot, was now also a home of reunions and reconstructions. Each brick represented a rescued story. Each occupied chair was a promise that no one would be invisible inside. And that night, as the lights gradually went out and the sounds diminished, what remained was the certainty that no past needs to define the future. Elijah breathed deeply as he lay down in his new bed. Now I can sleep without fear. And Abby, with the notebook in her lap, answered in thought, and I can wake up knowing that everything is in the right place. The afternoon had already ended, but light still persisted among the trees of the shelter. Jonathan observed Abby from afar, sitting in the garden with her notebook on her knees, drawing in silence. From the outside, everything seemed resolved. She smiled more, spoke with lightness, and got involved in the tasks of the new shelter naturally. But there was something absent in her gestures. She still didn't touch him affectionately, didn't allow herself to hug him like before. And this, as much as he tried to ignore it, bothered Jonathan like an open wound. She forgave me with words, he thought, but not with her heart. And on the porch, Matthew leaned against the wall and crossed his arms, watching his friend in silence for a few seconds before speaking. "You built all this. The shelter, the trust, the security. But the hardest part is still missing." Jonathan turned his face, confused. "What else can I do? I've changed. I gave everything I had." Matthew approached without removing the firmness from his voice. "You gave what's in your pocket, but not what's kept in your chest. Abby needs to know who the man behind the facade is." Jonathan breathed deeply with heavy eyes. "She's just a child." Matthew shook his head. "She's the only one capable of understanding. If you tell her everything, she'll come back to you." Later, inside the shelter, Jonathan sat in one of the empty rooms and stared at a white wall. The silence of the place echoed with his own thoughts. He took his wife's old cell phone, still kept in his coat pocket, and turned it on. He ran his fingers over the voice messages as one touches a scar. "The truth is in here, but I never had the courage to tell it." Outside, Abby walked slowly through the corridor, holding a folded coat. She stopped when she heard her father's voice talking to himself. She leaned against the wall, remained silent, and listened. Jonathan adjusted himself in the chair and began to speak as if someone was in front of him. "That night, the night your mother left, I was in a meeting. She called me 5 times, asked me to come home, said she wasn't feeling well, but I said it wouldn't be much longer to hold on a little more." He ran his hand over his face, as if pushing away the guilt. "When I finally left, traffic held me up for hours. I screamed inside the car, but no one heard. When I arrived, the ambulance had already taken her. I only saw the hospital door closing behind her." Abby bit her lips and held back her tears. Her heart was beating fast, and each word seemed to cut deeper. Jonathan continued, now with a choked voice. "She was gone before I could tell her I loved her. Before I could tell her she was the best thing that ever happened to me. And the worst part is that I carried this guilt with me all these years. I locked myself inside. I hid behind work, orders, silence, and without realizing it, I ended up doing the same to you." He rested his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor. "I didn't know how to love again, and you paid for it." She closed her eyes, let a tear roll down, and approached the door quietly. Jonathan took a crumpled envelope from his pocket and stared at it. "I wrote this for you days ago, but I knew it would only make sense if I said what's trapped in here. I don't want to be remembered as an absent father. I want to be remembered as someone who tried, even if late." Abby took a deep breath and slowly entered the room. Jonathan turned upon hearing the steps and stopped, surprised to see her. She said nothing. She just walked up to him, approached slowly, and hugged him. For a moment, the world stopped. The two embraced tightly with exposed hearts, as if they could stitch together every lost piece. Jonathan trembled. Abby cried silently, and neither tried to speak, because in that silent exchange there was more than words. There was recognition, there was healing. When she pulled away a little, she looked at her father and said with a firm but gentle voice, "Now I've listened, and now I believe." Jonathan touched his daughter's face carefully, as if it was something fragile. "I won't run away anymore." That night, the two returned to the courtyard and sat on the farthest bench. Jonathan handed over the envelope again, and Abby this time opened it. She read calmly, each line written with trembling but sincere letters. It was a letter of apologies, memories, and promises. He told about how he missed her, even when he couldn't show it, about how he hid behind anger, because the pain was greater than everything. When she finished reading, she put the paper in her pocket and rested her head on her father's shoulder. "It was hard growing up without you, but now maybe we can grow together." Jonathan looked at the dark sky and breathed deeply. "I don't know if I deserve a second chance." Abby closed her eyes and answered with a whisper, "Then don't waste it, because a second chance isn't about deserving, it's about not repeating." There, under the silent sky, father and daughter truly found each other. And even though there were still scars, for the first time in many years, there was also space for love to enter again. Elijah observed from a distance, smiling, and he knew at that moment that the cycle had finally begun to close. Not with loose ends, but with real ties. The shelter courtyard was now more than a space between walls. It was the living heart of everything that had been rebuilt. Elijah walked among the tables with calm steps, guiding the new residents about schedules, meals, and basic care. He carried a clipboard in his hand, and his eyes shone with a serenity that only exists in those who have survived their own pain. Jonathan appeared twice a week for administrative meetings and to ensure nothing was lacking. And even though he maintained a reserved posture, his presence no longer seemed distant. "You've become both owner and helper at the same time," said Elijah with a smile. "I never thought I'd say that to someone like you." Jonathan just smiled, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the supply list. "I discovered that helping doesn't mean commanding. It means listening." Abby observed them from afar, sitting on a bench with her sketchbook on her lap. The pencil moved lightly between her fingers, capturing the small details of the scene: the sun hitting Elijah's shoulder, the shadow of trees on her father's face. She recorded everything like someone who knows that memory may fail, but art does not. They don't realize how much they're changing. "But I see it," she thought with firm strokes. "Each line is a living memory." The art fair was approaching, and Abby worked on her paintings with dedication. Elijah had given up one of the shelter rooms for her to transform into a studio, and Jonathan had helped with paints, frames, and lighting. The paintings gathered delicate moments: the abandoned house, the first time she saw Elijah smile, her mother's note, her father's face crying in silence. In the last painting, Abby decided to go further. She painted a house with open windows and light coming from inside. In the living room, 3 figures sitting on the floor: the father, the daughter, and a bearded man, all smiling. "This is our living room, and no one is alone." On the day of the fair, people walked among the canvases with attentive gazes and emotional expressions. Abby, in a simple dress with her hair tied back, smiled shyly as she followed the comments. Elijah and Jonathan stood by her side the entire time, not interfering, just observing with pride. Matthew arrived later and made sure to take a photo in front of the painting of the illuminated living room. "It's the end of a cycle," he murmured. Jonathan looked at the painting and answered in a low voice, "Or the beginning of another, finally in the right way." Abby looked at them and added, "As long as the light stays on, it was worth it." While the exhibition followed its course, the image of the painting graced the cover of a small community newspaper. A copy reached Trevor's hands, now in a cold cell, sitting on a thin blanket. He looked at the image with a hard expression, eyes fixed on his brother's smiling face. For a few seconds, he remained motionless as if time had stopped. Then, with a dry gesture, he tore the newspaper in half and threw the pieces on the floor. He leaned his head against the wall and murmured to himself, "They moved on, and I stayed." The silence of the cell answered for him. Maybe it's too late for me. Maybe not. At the shelter, no one mentioned Trevor's name anymore, but the past he represented still lurked in small conversations. Elijah knew that forgiveness isn't always a direct path, and even though justice had been served, the pain didn't disappear without a fight. One late afternoon, he sat next to Abby with a sealed envelope in his hands. "I thought about writing to him. I just don't know what to say." Abby looked at the sky and answered sweetly, "Tell him that you survived, that you built something, and that you still believe he can do the same." Elijah nodded. "Maybe I'll start like this. It's still possible." Did you like Abby and Elijah's story? Then subscribe to the channel, comment from which city you're watching this beautiful story, leave your like, and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. I'll see you there.